Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our State of the Program series. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Joe Meade with me. We go through all the Big Ten football teams, not all of them, but most of them. We go over how the 2025 season went, and then in the second half, we will give a little bit of a state of the program to what they're looking forward to in 2026. So today, Joe, we're going over the USC Trojans, Lincoln Riley, and Jaden Mayava. Another year in the Big Ten. They went 9-3 in the regular season. They had three tough losses on the road to good football teams. Ultimately, weren't able to win any of them. They were able to beat two ranked teams at home. But before we get into the more specifics, what were your thoughts here on USC in 2025?
I think this was definitely a team that had a lot of pressure going into the year, Sean. It was a pretty tumultuous two seasons. You have the 7-6 season with Caleb Williams, the last one in the Big 12. Then last year, you start off really hot. You beat, at the time, what was thought of as a really good LSU team. You drop one to Michigan, then you beat Wisconsin. Then from there, their season last year in 24 went off the rails. So this year one, lucky for USC, also started well and really seemed to be going well. They start 4-0. Then they dropped that really strange game in Champaign-Urbana where, they kind of, you know, the start time didn't favor them, let's face that. 9 a.m. Central, I mean 9 a.m. Local time for them, 11 Central. And from there, Sean, they have a bye week, they beat Michigan. But what's going to be the defining characteristic of the season, Sean, is just they're good, but they're not good enough. And frankly, I think that's what a lot of USC fans expected going into the year was a 9-3, an improvement from the 7-5, or sorry, rather 6-6 season they had the year prior. But when in theory it happens, you lose to Illinois, you lose to Notre Dame, and you lose to Oregon. I think the Illinois is the real black eye on that season, to be honest with you, Sean. I think they dominated Michigan. They won a really tough night game at Nebraska, but there's really no signature win outside of Michigan on the schedule. That's what's most disappointing.
Yeah, they did make a step, like you said. They needed that at the very minimum. And, we thought that if the stars aligned, they could make the college football playoff, but they just weren't able to travel, very well away from home. Their away games, Joe, were Purdue on the road, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. Um, their only win against a big, they beat Nebraska and Purdue on the road in the Big Ten. And, that Nebraska game was a little bit dicey. I believe that was the game that Dylan Raiola got hurt,
Correct.
if
That's
I'm
where
not
TJ Latif
mistaken.
came in.
So, you have two wins. One of them's against the worst team in the Big Ten. The other one has a huge asterisk on it on the road. So it seems like that is where they're going to have to shore things up. They clearly beat the upper middle class teams at home, Iowa and Michigan, but they weren't able to compete on the road. And obviously, they played Oregon, who's a college football playoff team, Notre Dame, who probably should have been a college football playoff team, and Illinois, who were at home coming off of a humiliating loss the week before. So all the losses are explainable. They were probably in that. I don't remember exactly where they were in the last rankings, Joe, but probably in the 15 to 20 range.
Yeah, they're in the 15
Yeah.
to 20 range, shot. And frankly, that's where they were most of the year. There was a time, it's really funny. After that Illinois game, Sean, they kind of just stood there, even after they blew out Michigan.
Yeah.
Um, you know, to me, Sean, what really stinks is I think the Lincoln Riley era, I think kind of 4 years in, it reached its ceiling in year one so far. Now, we'll go into year five later for 2026, but Sean, it's just, you feel like you're going to break through in one of these games, and it's kind of like Michigan. It's a very similar theme. Just in those games, you're at least competitive, but what makes it sting really is I think two of those three games, particularly the Notre Dame and Illinois games, were winnable. There's just one play away in all of those. That's what makes it so frustrating. This easily could have been, for all the teams not in the college football playoff in the Big Ten, this easily could have been one.
And you have to think that maybe we've seen it in, both sports, Joe, that the teams from the West Coast traveling to the Midwest hasn't always gone the best. Now, I know Oregon won the Big Ten last year, but that is like a hurdle that they have to face, and their school isn't going anywhere, so that problem isn't going anywhere anytime soon. But there are things that they can overcome. I thought they did a decent job of protecting their home field this year, and they were way better at home. That's something that obviously they're going to have to do, because as hard as it is for them to go to the Midwest, it's hard for those teams to go out west too. The way that it's set up, it's one trip a year, whether you go to LA or the Northwest. I don't think teams go out there to play two of those four teams away. So
Correct.
if that's what you can do, you can maybe get some of your tougher games at home. Now, I haven't loaded up their schedule next year yet, but if you can get some better teams at home, get a solid schedule. We know the Notre Dame game is not happening. I think there's a way that they could make the playoff. And I thought there was a way they could have made the playoff this year, Joe. It's probably one of those three games goes the other way, and they're right there in the mix for that last spot. So it was a step, like we said, that they needed to take as they integrate into the Big Ten, but not as big as maybe some of their fans hoped.
Yeah, Sean, and what really sticks is, you're going to lose significant talent. Makai Lemon, Jacoby Lane, Lake McCree, Walker Lyons. That's the kind of least of the issues. Kamari Ramsey as well. Um, you do like that you keep Jada Maeva, you keep King Miller, but I think the biggest loss is D'Anton Lynn, Sean, back to Penn State, his alma mater. I think the defense made real strides this year compared to 2024. I really thought 2024 was an overhated unit because of the shortcomings of Miller Moss in the offense. I thought this year was a lot more stout. So to not have that continuity, it's going to be really rough. I think the Gary Patterson hire is really interesting. Clearly a guy who's been around the block, but not necessarily in the Big Ten. Not that it should be a huge difference. Uh, we'll kind of preview their 26th season in a second, Sean. But what stinks is you don't feel this great sense of continuity with USC. There's only two big splashes in the portal with John Tez Williams. You do get some guys on the line. You get Alex Van Subert from Michigan State too. Uh, to me, Sean, it comes down to this. Can USC make the plays in 2026? That's going to be the real question. And if they regress, then you're going to have some major problems too.
So let's turn the page to 2026, Joe. You mentioned some of their personnel decisions in terms of their schedule. They actually are still looking for a 12th opponent. Um, they play Fresno State and Louisiana Lafayette in the non-conference, and they're offering up week 0 to teams. So they're likely to have insert team there in week 0 before they play Fresno and Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns. And they start out their Big Ten play in the Garden State, Joe, against Rutgers in September. They host Oregon and Washington. They go to Penn State, Wisconsin, host Ohio State, go to Bloomington, host Maryland, and then in the last week they go to the Rose Bowl to play UCLA. So, what are
Oof.
your quick reactions here to this schedule?
From September 26th, where they play Oregon, which Sean just read off. So if you want to rewind, feel more than free
They
from when
they
they
can
go to
see it too.
Bloomington.
I got it up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there are there are honestly 5 to 6 losable games there, and five. I say six because at Wisconsin, that's still although after a bye, it's still a cross country trip they're going to have to make, and one
Yeah,
that
I mean
we've
it
seen.
could be a little cold there in October, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and then in Bloomington, I promise anyone who's been in that area of the country in mid-November, I guarantee it will not be LA 70 to 80 sunny, not even close. So I look at this schedule, Sean. I think they have to clean up at home like they did last year, and that doesn't necessarily mean going defeated. I assume they'll gonna, you know, people are going to pencil in dropping at least one of Oregon and Ohio State. It's really going to come down to can they win these big road games? This is
Yeah.
what we saw last year. Couldn't get it done in Champaign against the team. They're frankly better than, more talented than. I don't think anyone's going to argue that. Notre Dame, I think talent wise, pretty similar. I know Notre Dame, was really hot when they played them, but so was USC. They're coming off that big Michigan victory. You think they're going to have a repeat performance, and they were in that game for 90% of it. So, not out of the question. The biggest thing is, Sean, they have to outperform the Penn States of the world, the Washingtons of the world, right? Those are programs kind of also. I know Penn State and Washington last year underwhelmed. Let's get that out of the way, but consistently upper middle class Big Ten programs. They need to outpace them for this year. That means beating Washington at home and winning on the road at Penn State. Both those will be very difficult games, Sean. But for USC to show that they made significant progress from kind of the disastrous 23 season to 2026, to me, they have to go 10-2. They have to win a game that maybe they're not supposed to. So, you might pencil in one of the Oregon and Ohio State games as a loss. You pencil in the Indiana game in Bloomington as a loss. Okay. That means you got to win one of Oregon, Ohio State at home. You got to go to Happy Valley and win. And you got to avoid upsets like at Maryland. I mean, sorry, apologies, at Wisconsin, at Rutgers, right? Because you look at their schedule to vacuum last year, you think they go 10-2 based on everything you see. Like if I had the USC, if your one sample size was USC against Michigan, USC against Iowa, you're like, all right, this is a pretty good, upper middle Big Ten team. I bet they went 10-2. They probably beat Illinois. They probably lost who they were supposed to, which was Oregon and Notre Dame. That's the one thing USC has to do this year, Sean. What say you?
Yeah, they got to win a road game against somebody with a pulse or win a home game against a playoff team. That would be my
Yep.
either or. Like Oregon and Ohio State, I'm gonna refer to them as college football playoff teams at the moment because I think they'll start the season in those spots. Not that that matters, but Oregon's gonna be undefeated when they go to Memorial Coliseum. Is one more year they're going to SoFi
Yeah.
after this year? Yeah. So look, Washington at home, you should be winning that. You're going on the road to Penn State. It's a first year head coach, and I know they have to go to the East Coast twice essentially here, but you got to take care of business like in some of these games because Ohio State and Indiana looming there at the end of October and then November 14th. If you go into those games with two losses, there goes your chances at the playoff. Now, if you go then into those two with one loss, and then maybe you can get one win out of those two, and then maybe we're talking about 10-2 being a playoff team. But I think the path is there. I think obviously to start off the Big Ten season with probably one of the easier road games is a good sign, and then they get them a needle mover at the end of September, and those are great when you win them. And they really put you ahead of things, but on the other hand, if you drop one, then you're really, really going with a thin margin the rest of the way. So, this is a really interesting one, Joe, and we've done these over the course of the last few months. So, I don't remember if we give like specific record predictions, but I think 8, 9, or 10 wins is what we're going to see here.
Yeah, I think, barring disaster, you're in that 8-10 range, Sean. I don't see them going into, I'll put you this way. I don't see them winning three of the four of Oregon at Penn State, Ohio State, and in
Yeah,
Bloomington. I think
two
that's going to be
two out
very
of those
difficult.
four is probably a good outcome.
No, two out of those four is great. And then you just don't want to slip up anywhere, which includes Washington at home. And I think barring some
At
crazy,
UCLA last week of the
yeah.
season,
But Sean, barring some crazy non-conference opponent getting scheduled, which I don't foresee right now because most
yeah,
major opponents are all booked up. You avoid Notre Dame. That's the biggest thing. It's funny. Michigan and USC are in similar positions. You're trying to elevate from, back from upper middle back to the upper class. At least both these teams in the last, even the first year to Lincoln Riley, these have been premier programs, whether it was the Pac-12 or the old Big Ten. Both that were trying to elevate. This is the schedule that a lot of people are going to be like, well, this isn't the schedule to do it on. Well, the bottom line is, Sean, this is where you got to put your big boy pants on. You have two of those games at home. You have Oregon and Ohio State at home. You go to Penn State, who I think you're better than even roster wise without a snap being played. And then you go to Indiana. If you win two of those games, you put your boy pants on. You win one of them, I think you're just kind of in the same place, which is a good team, but nowhere near elite, and certainly nowhere near elite, and certainly nowhere near a college football playoff team at 9-3.
and we're just projecting here, Joe. Basically, what we think these teams are going to be. Like Washington could be really good, and UCLA could be surprising. Penn State is a first-year head coach with a lot of players from the previous school. We've seen those teams do well before. So I think there's a chance that we look back on this schedule and then we're like, man, really, really tough that USC had so many good teams this year. Or, like in Indiana's case last year, the seas can kind of part for you. If you have Maryland at the end of the season, you could potentially be playing an interim coach there. I don't know about Wisconsin, but they could be in a position where they might be able to fire their coach. So, you know, I think the path is there. I'm going to say I think they come up one game short again. But unless you got anything to add, Joe, we're going to wrap it up here.
I completely agree, Sean.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.